Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another great edition of these wonderful events called Breakfast at Blake. I am glad to represent the Alumni Board and the Office of Institutional Advancement that puts on these breakfasts. My name is Woody Kingman, class of 1978, and this is our third presentation of the 2020-21 year, following a wonderful virtual breakfast in November with filmmaker Laura Gabbert, class of 1985. Hope many of you saw that. Well, going forward, all of our Breakfast at Blake's this year will be offered online during this school year. While it's preferable to meet in person, of course, we're not going to let COVID get in the way. At least holding this program virtually gives us the opportunity to engage with our alumni and friends and parents, both near and far. In fact, the beauty of it is that we've got a lot of participants from out of state today, so that'll be a lot of fun. We're excited to announce that Tim Baylor, who is a grandparent of a 32 and a former Vikings player and current McDonald's franchisee and property developer, will be presenting at our next Breakfast at Blake on February 18th. Take note, that's going to be at 8:30, not 7:30, so that our West Coast friends can join us. Well, this morning, I'm delighted all of you could join us to hear Cassidy Blackwell, class of 2002. At Blake, she played tennis and lacrosse and right wing on the undefeated women's hockey team. And during her senior year, Cassidy was also the homecoming queen. After graduating, Cassidy headed to St. Louis, where she studied French literature and architecture at the University of Washington. At Washington University. From there, Cassidy headed to Silicon Valley and has held various positions in marketing, communications, and brand management, including a stint at the online women's personal shopping service, Stitch Fix, which was founded by fellow Blake alum and her friend, Katrina Lake. Cassidy and her fiance, Adam, live in Sonoma. They'd hoped to be married last year, but coronavirus got in the way. God willing, they'll be exchanging their vows at an Airbnb in France this summer. Currently, Cassidy is Director of International Communications at Airbnb. In her role, she leads a global team of communications professionals across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and China. Basically, just about everything except the United States. And together with her team, they're responsible for helping to support Airbnb's mission to create a world where everyone can belong anywhere and everywhere. A few notes before we begin this morning. We'll be recording this session, so all of you will have your video and microphones turned off. But please ask questions. There should be a Q&A icon at the bottom of your webinar screen, and I encourage you to ask any questions you might have throughout the presentation, and we will pose them to Cassidy near the end. And now, coming to us live from Silicon Valley, where I'll point out it is only 5:30 in the morning, to share her thoughts on sourcing authenticity, aligning the personal and professional through purpose, is Blake's own Cassidy Blackwell.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here this morning and share my story with you. Thanks so much for that awesome introduction, Woody. I really appreciate you sharing a bit of the details to get us started. I have a presentation I'm going to share today, but I had a chuckle putting this together because nearly 20 years after graduating, Blake still has me doing homework. And they don't tell you that after the 8th grade speech, after the senior speech, there's the Breakfast at Blake speech. But let me go ahead and share my screen because I do have a presentation today so that we can go ahead and get started. So, as Woody mentioned, I'm going to be chatting with you around how I have found alignment of the personal and professional with purpose. Woody talked a bit about these details, but a bit more about me by way of introduction. So, hello from Sonoma, California. I actually just moved out to Sonoma County after 15 years in San Francisco. Woody noted that it is 5:30 in the morning here. So maybe in the future for our West Coast community, we could do a brunch at Blake, could get a bit more people out of bed with brunch, which is always lovely. I'm currently the Director of International Communications at Airbnb, where I've been been for just about 3 years. I have a deep love of people and travel and adventure. But while we are in this time of COVID, all of that has evolved into a deep love of horses, of hiking, and of home ownership. If you are a person who is involved on social media, please follow me at CassBlackSF on Twitter, or you can find me on LinkedIn. So I've always wanted to do this next slide, but hi, Mom. Hi, buddy. I can't see who's in the audience, but my mom, Leah Faber, and my grandfather, George Blackwell, are both on the call today. And so I wanted to give the fam a shout out. And I know that they're going to tell me to talk more slowly, so I'm going to try to remember to do that through this presentation. But hello, good morning, and I love you both. I also wanted to give a quick plug for the Alumni Trivia Night happening next week. I will be competing on Team Lady Blake, named after our very chatty text message thread, and we are very competitive, so bring your A game and see you on the leaderboard. This is me alongside the rest of Team Lady Blake, Andrea Ravitch, Sarah Riley, and Lauren Waxman, Nay Zwick. So yes, bring it. We'll see you out there. All right, let's dig into it. So the purpose of my talk today is to share my professional and personal story with you and how I've worked to infuse both with purpose. But first, I need to give you the headlines of my story. Here is my autobiography, the Too Long Didn't Read edition. So as Woody mentioned, after Blake, I went to Washington University in St. Louis, graduated in 2006 with my degree in French literature. Before that, I had always wanted to be an architect. So during my senior year, I actually applied to and was accepted into a Master's of Architecture program. But I actually ended up transitioning into working into communications, working first at a boutique PR firm, and then doing more policy-focused work, doing criminal justice reform, doing accountable development for nonprofits and public agencies. But while I was working in policy, I actually felt that I was missing this creative spark, that I wasn't fully creatively fulfilled. And so at the same time, I was actually going through this transition of stopping straightening my hair. And for a Black woman, this is a very big deal. I had been straightening my hair for 25 years, but to document the process, as well as to give me that creative outlet, I started a blog and called it Natural Selection. That blog became larger and larger and larger, and ended up quitting policy completely and dove headfirst into the world of curl, traveling all around the world, connecting with other women of color around how to live in their authentic beauty. At that same time, I was in San Francisco this whole time period, and I noticed around me that there was this tech boom starting to emerge. All of these startups starting to get a lot of traction and support, and there was a lot of energy and enthusiasm around it. And a lot of them were being driven by social media networking. And so because of the blog, I had actually learned a lot about that space, and I joined Stitch Fix, founded by our fellow Blake alum, Katrina Lake, and spent about a year there as their first social media and content hire, before boomeranging back into the beauty business at Walker & Company, where I was their director of brand engagement. Walker & Company is a health and beauty products company focused on people of color. We had a men's shave system called Bevel, which retails at Target. And then while I was there, I developed and launched a hair care product line called Form that we launched at Sephora. I spent about 3 years there before joining the team at Airbnb. And I've been at Airbnb for about 3 years since. So, I've heard about this thing called a career ladder, but I certainly have not experienced anything like a linear, logical pathway and journey. In fact, I would define my journey as a series of railroad tracks with switches constantly converging and diverging, but always moving forward. The one thing that has remained constant through all of these changes and pivots are my values. My values are my constants. And a few years ago, I'd say about 7 or 8 years ago, I resolved to give up New Year's resolutions, and instead I replaced it with this annual process of reflection and goal setting across several different areas that are listed here. Those areas are personal development, professional development, family and friends, financial discipline, spirituality, health and wellness, and home. Somebody joked that this is the most type A minus thing that they've ever seen because I do it all by hand, and they're absolutely right. But it really helps me set my intentions at the top of every year. But the most important part of this process is aligning each goal to one of my personal values. So today I'm going to walk you through each of my personal values and a bit about how they show up in my life. But before we dig into how I break down those values and a bit of how they show up in my story, the thing that I want to share with you is how I really embrace them and keep them active in my life. So at the top of every year, I write them down and I write a definition for each of those values. Then I review them on a monthly and quarterly and annual basis, and then I live them. And the way that I do that is that I attach a verb to each value. And I'll show you a bit of how that really gets brought to life. So we're going to go ahead and get started with my first value, which is learn constantly. I define this by saying, when I learn, I grow, and I push myself to see the opportunities to expand my mind and my capacity and my empathy. I actually wanted to start today with learn constantly because I think it was the product of my 8 years at Blake, where we were encouraged to develop this lifelong love of learning. If you were to ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I wouldn't have the words to have been able to tell you that as a student, literally because many of those words didn't exist. These are words such as blogger, social media, content marketing, influencer, Airbnb. None of these were in existence 15 years ago, let alone when I was a student being asked this question around what I wanted to be. I mentioned my journey of starting this hair blog. And for me, it was really about a journey to learn about myself, my family, the science of hair. I asked a lot of questions and I took a lot of photographs. I made myself really vulnerable. And in the process of doing so, I made friends and community. But more than that, I learned social media and content strategy and what it means to build an editorial platform, how to be a better writer, how to be a speaker. So eventually this hobby of mine turned into a career opportunity. There are a lot of people that laughed at me when I took this leap from going from policy, where it was a really solid known entity, into becoming a hair blogger, which was just very amorphous. But it didn't matter to me because I was doing it for myself to learn and to learn constantly. But that journey of learning for me is never over. And when I was at Walker & Company, I was feeling a bit stuck about whether or not I should become more of a brand marketer or to start to build out skills in digital marketing, which would have been a new pathway for me. So this is a photograph of one of my mentors. His name is John Maeda. He is an incredible designer. So I was telling him about this inflection point that I was at. And he was like, well, Cassidy, once upon a time, samurais were trained with only one sword. But one day, one samurai learned to train with two, and he became the strongest samurai in the land. So think about that. And so I thought about that and I understood what he was trying to say. So for me, it was an opportunity to develop a fluency and quantitative skills to balance out my qualitative talents. And for me in my journey, it's definitely been a benefit to be able to speak both languages as opposed to just one. So this is a photo of John and I. He and I are in touch a lot, and he like me is always learning constantly. And so it's really important for me to keep people such as him in my life that keep me pushing forward. So the next value is embrace inspiration. And I just have to break my rhythm here for a second to share with you a major source of inspiration. Yesterday, we made history in so many ways, including, but not limited to, the swearing in of the first woman of color as vice president. And for so long, people like me have had to live with these implicit messages constantly being impressed upon us that we do not belong in positions of power, in positions of leadership. So the fact that we now have a woman of color inhabiting one of the highest offices in our land is beyond inspiring. It inspires me to keep on pushing forward, to keep growing my own capacity. To me, it's a real validation that everything that previously made me feel like an outsider has now prepared me to be a more connected and powerful leader. And I thought that this quote here on the right perfectly summed that up. So back to the value of embrace inspiration. I define this as seeking inspiration from beyond myself and sharing this sense of wonder with others. So for me, if I'm not inspired, I find myself in a deeply stagnant and purposeless place. And years ago, I found that my deepest well of inspiration was found in the exploration of global culture. I started speaking French when I was just 4 years old and stuck with it all the way through the end of college, eventually studying abroad in France. I was actually even supposed to get married in France this past year, is what he mentioned, but COVID happened and c'est la vie. So while I was young and in French classes in lower school, middle school, my ideas and conceptions about French culture were quite limited by my limited vocabulary. You know, I knew how to say the very important essentials, which generally revolved around food. So un croissant, un café, Nutella. Then in upper school, Madame Cassavant blew my mind with this whole module on the Francophone countries of Africa. So from the comforts of her classroom overlooking Parade Stadium, we took this wonderful and magical and sensory journey to the spice markets of Morocco, to the concert halls of Tunisia. I never knew that these customs and cultures existed. And from that point on, I was totally hooked. And honestly, I really haven't looked back. I also believe Madame Cassavant is on the call this morning. So, Madame, bonjour, je vous remercie pour ce leçon qui a changé ma vie. Thank you so much for this lesson that changed my life. So this is a photograph of my very first trip to Africa, where I was exploring the beautiful cosmopolitan city of Dakar. Dakar, Senegal is at this really compelling intersection of French and Muslim and African culture. It wasn't just a trip for me, it was a way of connecting with my history as a Black American. It resonated so deeply because of all of the incredible people that I met along the way that hosted me, that welcomed me. So when I had the opportunity to join Airbnb, who embraces this unique form of hosted travel, and quite frankly, a way of travel that made it more accessible and attainable for me as a young person in San Francisco, I knew it was the right fit because it was a complete alignment of my values. So every day, the fruits of my work allow me to channel this inspiration I seek from global travel and share it with others. And I am so lucky that I get to work with an incredible team all around the world. And even if we only get to experience each other's world right now via Zoom screen, it remains this incredible source of inspiration to be so connected and plugged into our global fabric. So if you're wondering how I'm embracing inspiration while the world of travel has been limited to about a 200-mile radius from our houses during a global pandemic, well, you would be quite right. One of the ways that I have been figuring out how to travel is actually through my nose, through the art of perfuming. I've also dove headfirst into country living now in Sonoma County, where we do things like mushroom identification in our redwood forest, and I'm learning how to ride horses. And I go on a lot, and I mean a lot of hikes. In fact, this presentation was written in my head on a hike a few weekends ago. But if anything has pushed me to remember this value, it's been a global pandemic that's kept my wheels on the ground. The design of this presentation is actually a really good reflection of this value because it integrates African wax fabrics. So these past several months have been an amazing reminder that inspiration is everywhere. You just have to seek it out and integrate it into your life when you can. So my next value is stay active. I define this as taking initiative, seeking movement, and avoiding passive participation. I found in my career and my experience, I am my own best advocate, and it's worked out pretty well for me. So at Walker and Company, there was a point in time when we were about to kick off an external search for a brand director, until I spoke up and voiced that not only did I want the role, but I was highly qualified to take on the role. And if I hadn't mustered the courage to say something and to raise my hand, my life would be very different. We would have hired the external person, and I probably would have stayed in the more junior position that I was in at the time. That said, speaking up for myself is important, but what's even more important, I have found, is speaking up for others. And now more than ever, it's become so much more important for me to use my platform and my position of relative privilege to ensure that I advocate for others when I see injustice, when I see opportunities for inclusion, and simply when I see that something is wrong. As unprecedented as the events of the Capitol riots were, and as extreme as it was, the undercurrents and the themes and the trends themselves that underpinned the Capitol riots are not unprecedented. In fact, for Black people and people of color, microaggressions are a daily indignity that we endure. Sure, they're unintentional, but these subconscious exclusion can, over a person's lifetime, have seriously adverse effects on a person's confidence, on their emotional well-being, on their feelings of safety. At Airbnb, our mission is to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere. And that means not only for our community of hosts and guests, but also for our global teams. So I seek to lead my team with empathy and understanding, to lean into cultural nuance, to invite a diverse range of opinions, to make sure that everyone, and I mean everyone, has a seat at the table. Microaggressions aside, sometimes there are overt gestures of discriminations and instances of discrimination. And then you better believe that I'm going to speak up about those. So this is a photo of my partner, Adam, and I on the day that we closed on our home, as I mentioned, which is in Sonoma County, California. The deed on the house is actually, which was written in 1960, had what was called a racial covenant that said that only the members of the Caucasian race could live on the land unless they were servants. So this covenant said only members of the Caucasian race could live on the land unless they were servants. And this was written in 1960 in California. So I spoke up. We had it redacted. It was actually kind of an onerous process to do so. And I educated those involved with the closing to make sure that they knew how these policies could be just really interpreted in a really discriminatory way, even to this day. So for me, being active makes sure that I can shape my world and our world in a way that is more just and more fair. So the next value that I'm going to talk through is live well. I define this as taking care of my mind, my body, my spirit, and the world. So this past weekend, actually, Tristan Walker, who's the founder and company of Walker and Company, just texted me the link to this post from the Walker and Company Instagram page from a few years ago. And I was like, Tristan, perfect. This is the perfect example. I'm giving this presentation, and I'm so glad that you surfaced this. It was actually quite serendipitous. So at Walker and Company, we did this series on our social channels that featured a portrait of each employee and our personal interpretation of the company values. And at Walker and Company, the one that I was assigned to was wellness. They articulate it as wellness, and I articulate it as live well. So if that's not in alignment of the personal and professional, then I just don't know what is. So I tend to have gotten used to operating in high pressure, fast moving companies. But one of the things that I learned outside of the classroom at Blake is the importance of getting fresh legs out there on the ice. This comes from my days playing ice hockey in upper school. So for me as a professional, getting those fresh legs back out on the ice is super important. That means that I take a mental break, a pause, a moment of mindfulness that really helps me make sure that I can operate at peak performance day in and day out. I also come from a very athletic family. As I mentioned, my mom on the call was our varsity girls basketball coach. My grandfather, George Blackwell, buddy, he was the Blake varsity baseball coach. So sports are really important in my family. However, in the midst of a global pandemic, sports are generally canceled. However, out here in the countryside, horseback riding is actually perfect for social distancing. So I've been taking lessons and learning how to jump. And so what I love about this sport is how it requires this incredible physical and mental focus that really helps me find my wellness through living well. The next value that I'm going to chat through is being kind. I define this as when we all do better, we all do better. I devote intentional time and resource to giving and service. So, I wanted to join the team at Airbnb because, as I mentioned, I find deep inspiration in global cultures and communities. But what I didn't realize in joining was how much the experience of working on a global team would make me a kinder human and, by extension, a better leader. So my job as the Director of International Communications exists to help others bring their very best work to life. And in order to do that, I need to understand how to cultivate this collaborative and safe environment for people to thrive. I've personally worked in unsafe environments, and so I just know the mental toll that can create, that can put on a person, and how if they're not confident in themselves, if they don't feel safe, they just can't operate and deliver the best work that they can. So kindness for me is just an expression of how to make a person's day just a little bit better so that they can do just that much better. I've extended this value of kindness to make sure that I'm also supporting communities and initiatives that matter to me and that really need it. So an example of this is that a few years ago, I learned about this horrifying statistic that 50% of maternal deaths in San Francisco are Black women. So, just really fired up about that statistic, I joined the advisory board of a local nonprofit called Sister Web that provides doulas to at-risk mothers of color, that provides the potentially life-saving critical support that they need. This past summer, the world was shocked by the killing of George Floyd, and this also hit very close to home for us here in the Blake community, quite literally close to home for us. So I leveraged my platform and my privilege and my network to organize a small fundraiser with the goal of raising $3,500 on my 35th birthday. In a matter of 24 hours, with support from a lot of those in the Blake community, actually, I was able to raise $20,000 for organizations working to dismantle institutional racism. But not only did we raise money for these issues, but also a ton of awareness, which is super important to me. Most recently, I've actually joined the school committee on the Blake Board of Trustees, where our charter is to explore how to broaden alumni engagement and specifically do so and specifically how to do better and more purposeful engagement of diverse alumni. But as this pandemic rages on, I mean, there is a lot of suffering out there, and we're all sort of dealing with our own flavor of struggle. So just remember that extending even the smallest of kindness during these incredibly challenging times can make a difference in someone's day, and I certainly know that it has for me. The final value that I'm going to chat through today is sourcing authenticity. I define this as being uncompromising in the pursuit of individuality and surrounding myself with people and experiences who embrace this themselves as well as cultivate it in others. So I moved to San Francisco after graduating college in 2006, and it was filled with incredibly talented, creative, passionate individuals in pursuit of their dreams. I arrived at this in-between era that I would best describe as the Wild Wild West Part 2. So the latest tech boom hadn't quite begun yet, and so it was this nitty-gritty, quirky counterculture just filled with people doing and being and exploring their purest and most authentic versions of themselves. And it was in this phase that in my personal life, when I decided to withdraw my enrollment from the Masters of Architecture program, because I discovered after listening just to a little bit of my gut that at that time I was going to architecture school because it's what I thought I should be doing rather than what I actually wanted to do. And at that time, what I wanted to do was to stick around San Francisco and learn how to hula hoop really well. I also had this really cool job in communications that I scored on Craigslist. I worked for this amazing boutique PR firm. So that gave me the means and purpose to stick around San Francisco. So I stayed on and learned a ton about communications, but I actually also got really good at hula hooping and still am to this day. So I can do tricks, but that is a whole other Breakfast at Blake experience. So anywho, San Francisco during this time had this crazy, buzzy, creative energy that eventually turned into the second wave of startups that were born out of the financial crisis of 2008. So people were spinning up ideas to make ends meet. The Airbnb founding story is one that's very well documented. They rented out air mattresses in their apartments during this design conference when hotels were sold out, just because they needed a way to make their rent. And this was a crazy idea, you know, staying in someone's house on an air mattress. Well, these types of ideas were everywhere during this time, and I loved it and I embraced it, I adopted it, and I worked at several of these startups whose crazy ideas have now become much larger, much more lucrative leviathans of business. One of the things that all of these founders and startup teams have in common is their unrelenting pursuit of their authentic goal. And I'm just incredibly inspired by this entrepreneurial spirit. So for me, one of the things that I've started to explore during what I call my COVID chrysalis, while we're sort of stuck inside, just becoming the butterflies that I know that we're all going to emerge as, is venture capital and angel investing. I'm really excited about the idea of helping others build the companies that they are most uniquely qualified to create. I find that this authentic purpose in business is actually really rare. So I'm really looking forward to learning how I can better empower it and cultivate it. So the question that I'm focused on now is, what type of investor do I want to be? Where do I want to focus my energy? Who am I authentically and uniquely qualified to support in their pursuits? Because to invest in someone's vision, you have to authentically believe in it yourself. It's literally putting your money where your mouth is. So I have a ton of ideas on this front, and my journey is just beginning. So as the saying goes, watch this space as I hula hoop my way into investing. So that is it. These are my 6 core values. They're not a single North Star, but together they create this constellation that I use to help me guide towards my purpose. There's a lot of permeability between my personal passions and my professional projects, but as we come to a close of my Breakfast at Blake presentation, I actually wanted to do something interactive, which is to invite you to share your personal values and do so in a way that allows you to create it as a verb to see how you might live it wholly. So remember, the exercise is to take a value and make it a verb. So if a value that you embrace is courage, you could make it be courageous. If it's fun, maybe try make fun. So we're going to take a couple minutes right now. I've got my handy dandy timer here. So go ahead and use the chat function and share it with the rest of the group. I can see the chat box here. I know it's early, but hopefully you can stretch those fingers and dust off the keyboard and have a little fun with it and share with others. Dan Staley to lighten up. Oh, I love these. Miss Ruda, so good to see you. Live in your truth. These are wonderful. Keep it coming. Be confident. Continue learning. Prioritize joy. Oh my gosh, Susie Q. Love that. Unleash your creativity. live with humor. SGR, that's beautiful. Love you too. This is so fun. Find your happy, foster leadership. Live with kindness, speak my truth. This is awesome. Keep it coming, guys. Find your happy place, practice gratitude, live sustainably, to understand how things work and to use that knowledge to improve my, others, and organizational effectiveness, share with others, be inspiring, engage actively, love you too, Rave. Thank you for engaging actively in this. Be loud and proud. Make adventure, love that. Take time to explore, even if it's just from the living room. Preach on that one. Listen more than you speak. Live fiercely in the truth, assume positive intent, seek new experiences, support authentically. It's so fun to see you too, Sandra. Elena, are you in Germany? We will catch up soon. Practice patience. Awesome. This is great. Keep them coming. We are going to now dive into oh, great, upstate New York. We are now going to dive into a Q&A. So thank you so much for sharing all of these values, but I really want to hear from you and just hear any questions that you have while we have a few minutes remaining. Thanks so much.
Oh, Cassidy, that was terrific. Thank you. Really appreciate it. It was really fun to hear about that. And I do have some questions here, and for all of you who are participating with us, please feel free to type in any in that Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. But the first question goes right off of your talk and your values, and someone asked that she would love to hear more about how you came up with those values. Did you do any research and reflection, or did they just come to you as you were on one of your hikes out there in California?
You know, it's an awesome question. So it was definitely on one of my global adventures. There was a point in time, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, where I just needed to focus, to reground, and to find my voice again. So I took myself on a yoga retreat in Mexico, and stayed at this little yoga shala that didn't even have like a bathroom in the room. And I took a journal and some AirPods and sat on the beach and just frankly wrote a lot. I wanted to be able to ground myself and define these values so that I could keep them front and center. And when I mean that I have them written around me, like I really do refer to them and reflect on them pretty constantly. So yeah, it was a process, a really intentional process, but they're really reflections of things that I've embraced my entire life. One of the things that my mom has always said to me is remember your morals and values. And so for me, this was just a way of more clearly articulating the life lesson that she had been pushing me to embrace my entire life.
Wow, terrific. Really neat. It's certainly a different perspective than we've gotten from many of our speakers. Of course, they all have great values, but no one has shared them the way that you have. Tying them all together, you are now a leader, and someone asked, how do you encourage your team members to also embrace and engage in the importance of taking a pause and being well and working on their values? And given the fact that you're in such a fast-paced environment, it's not always easy to focus on those things. So how do you encourage that among your team members?
Yeah, so actually the process that I use for setting goals is pretty similar. I actually have extended it into my team operations because I found that the model that's allowed me to achieve a lot is actually a great way of just organizational efficiency. But within that, I've had 3 roles at Airbnb. The first was the director of strategic projects. Then I was the director of editorial on the communications team, and now the director of international communications. And I find that when stepping into a new role, it's just a really great opportunity to talk about your team charter, to define your team values. And more often than not, you create this space of authentic sharing that allows people to sort of transcend and to bring their personal life, their personal lives and their experiences into the work that they do, because it matters. We all generally live the brand. I would say that now more than ever, there is a very permeable membrane between work and home life. I think, many of us are working from the comforts of our own living rooms and office and kitchen tables. And so you just start to get the more real individual because of this set of constraints that we're operating within. So for me, it's really about just being real, being authentic, using some of these frameworks that have worked for me to create this space of sharing and community for the team to be able to bring them their best selves.
Terrific. Thanks. So here's a couple that I'm going to combine. One person asks, you mentioned that your travel changed your life. What were some of the big takeaways from your first experience? Is a question. As someone, they are someone on an international team, how have you used your values to create strategy for cross-cultural communication and collaboration?
I'm sorry, you cut out for the first part of that question. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, of course. So what were some of the big takeaways from your first travel experiences abroad? And then a follow on to that, as a member of an international team, how have you used your values to create strategy for cross-cultural communication and collaboration?
Great. So I'd actually say that there's definitely a strong overlap in those questions in my answer. We sort of are fed this narrative that there's a lot of otherness in the world, that people are very different, and it's that we belong separately, that we have separate cultures and communities, that different is weird, it's wrong, it's bad. And so that's just sort of this implicit narrative that exists, I believe, in the United States. That said, the more that I got out into the world, I quickly realized that we are more alike than we are different. We share, the same connection to family. We share the same honest desire to be accepted. We share this just general human kindness. And so that's something that I just realized the more that I started to see different cultures and communities and out in the world, whether it was in France or Western Africa or Latin America, that we are just generally more alike than we are different. That's actually something that I learned pretty deeply in the hair world as well. The beauty business is sort of built on these archetypal models of what it means to be a certain idealized image of beauty, but at the end of the day, our biology is human. And so if you're really able to tap into that, you can really help to build this empathy and understanding across communities and help to create a stronger, more resilient global society, down to the level of operating and developing and leading a team.
Terrific. Thanks. So interesting question here. Someone asks, do you ever experience imposter syndrome, and how do you fight it off?
Yeah. Honestly, absolutely. I think it's really difficult for me to not have that. But one of the things that I try to remember is a mantra that every room that you are in, you are supposed to be in, and that you have something unique to offer. You have your story, you have your experience. And so remember that you are there for a reason. And if you're invited to that table, it's because people want you to contribute for that purpose. It was funny because when I was hired on at Airbnb, the reason I was hired was the fact that I had a very different background than a lot of my other colleagues. I came from the beauty business. I had more of a content marketing background, that I was more focused on brand as opposed to day-to-day bread and butter communications. But the fact that they wanted somebody that had a different background was something for me to always remember, because they desired that because I would bring bring a different approach, a different vantage point, a different set of networks and values and ideas. And that was something that just helped to diversify and make our efforts as a global team even better.
Got it. Great. Okay. Few questions on travel, since actually, that is your business now. Friend asked, how do you select your travel destinations, and what learning agenda do you have when you travel?
Love that. I have a very long list of places that I would like to go. I mean, at this point, I would go like 3 counties over because we've sort of been sheltered in place here, closing in on a year right now. But I'm a very active user of Pinterest to help me organize where it is that I want to go. I happen to work at a place where I get, exposure and access to incredible experiences and opportunities and hosts and places to stay through the Airbnb platform that just help me stay on the front foot of really interesting, trending places. But I really like to look at places that are more off the beaten path, where I can have that authentic experience that isn't mass travel. I don't like the types of travel experiences where I sit on one of those big red buses. I want to be in the community. I want to talk to people. I want to walk around and go to the corner store. I want to learn the language. So for me, it's really less about the where and more about the what I can do there that fits probably in line with all of my values. I've had some amazing travel experiences just following that. One of which that's coming to mind right now, actually, for a group of Minnesotans, this will probably be a bit surprising. But a few Decembers ago, I wanted to go. We went to Fairbanks, Alaska. So Alaska in the dead of winter, in the middle of December and into January, is not on the top of many people's lists. But being able to just be in this interior and see this magical Narnia that, like, frankly, is so different than any other winter that I've ever experienced. We ended up having dinner with the mayor of Fairbanks and, going dog sledding. It was really, really an awesome opportunity that was way off the beaten path from what a lot of people might have generally opted for. Something that was not accessible via Sun Country Airlines.
Exactly. Tell me, and all of us, about your favorite Airbnb spot that you've been to, and tell me and all of us about one that you'd like to go to that you haven't visited yet.
Awesome. So I think it was 3 years ago, we went to Cuba, where we have an amazing host community. And so I had this travel itinerary planned out. It was Havana. It was a small fisherman's village, and then it was back to the Valley of Vinales. And so because Cuba doesn't have as much internet connectivity, everything was booked and planned out to the nanosecond, because we didn't really have cell phones. We were using like printed out MapQuest directions. So we get to Havana, everything's good. We get to this fisherman's village, and it was called Puerto Esperanza, and it was tiny. There were donkeys were used instead of vehicles. There was no electricity. And it was absolutely magical. We were hosted by a man named Ruchlan and Eva. And we were only supposed to stay there for 2 nights, and we ended up staying for 7 days, spent Christmas with them. And we were actually just messaging back and forth on the Airbnb platform, wishing each other a happy new year and a Merry Christmas just a couple weeks ago, because of this amazing connection that we all made with each other. It was just something so memorable and so meaningful, that it was just, and it was all because of these people, of these hosts, that made it such an amazing experience to see how they live and welcome us into their home.
Oh, fun. And where's the next big Airbnb for you? Where are you going to go?
Let's see, where do I want to go next? I have my eyes set on some Southeast Asia adventures. I would love to go to Cambodia. One of the things that my grandfather, Buddy, on the call, and I have talked a lot about is going to Vietnam together. It's a place that he has always wanted to go. And so I would absolutely adore the opportunity to explore this new country with him. So I'd say, you know, pretty far flung, but again, I would take a trip to LA at this point over anything else.
Pretty great. Well, Cassidy, thank you ever so much. As I think I might have mentioned to you, by sheer coincidence, two of my Blake classmates and I are looking at going to Tuscany this September, and we have been all over Airbnb's website. And I might just mention that you pointed out to me that there's this Airbnb Luxe, which is premium sites, which I encourage everyone to take a look at because, wow, the properties all over the world are just fantastic. And indeed, Luke's, they are luxurious. So pretty great. Thank you ever so much. And I just want to remind everyone that this was recorded, and we will send out a link to all the participants so that you can play it again or pass it on to your friends. And also to stay in touch with Cassidy. Cassidy, give us again, you do have a blog, right?
So I had the blog. It's no longer active. I did take it down. I archived all the content myself, but you know, Twitter is a great place. So at CassBlackSF, or LinkedIn. You can just search me, Cassidy Blackwell, and we can connect on LinkedIn as well.
That sounds great. Again, thanks ever so much, Cassidy. We really appreciate it. Best of luck to you, and hope that you have a lot of fun, that you do get to France this year, and that you and Adam can exchange vows over there. That's our best wish for you. So thanks to all of you. Hope to see you next month. And remember, we're going to start at 8:30 so that when Cassidy joins us and her other California friends, they don't have to get up quite so early. And with that, we'll be signing off, and best wishes to all of our Blake family, parents, students, grandparents, friends, alumni, teachers. God bless you all. Take care.